launching our new December series, Scandal. In this series, we'll be discussing Jesus Christ and the scandal that his life caused and created. If you didn't catch from that video, being Christmas time, that's a modern take on Mary and Joseph, the parents of Jesus. Most scholars believe Mary was probably around 16 years old, a teenager, not much older than you guys. And she wasn't married yet. They were betrothed to be married. They were engaged. And in Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, that created probably a pretty big scandal back then, 2,000 years ago. So that's what that video is about. Today's message of this 3-week series leading up to Christmas, and we're really close. We've only got 2 more J-High services this year. Only 2 left in 2013. It's crazy. So today's message is called The Expectation of the Messiah. The Expectation, right? So write that down on the top of your screen. Scandal is the name of the series. And the name of our message today is The Expectation of the Messiah. Today we'll be discussing the history and context that Jesus was born into on the first Christmas 2,000 years ago. Our first passage today is found in the Old Testament book of Isaiah, which was written 700 years before Jesus was born. 700 years before Jesus was born, the prophet Isaiah said this about Jesus. Follow on. Isaiah 9, 6 through 7. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government and its peace will never end. He will rule with fairness and justice from the throne of his ancestor David for all eternity. The passionate commitment of the Lord of Heaven's armies will make this happen. So what are we seeing here? This is the prophecy of the Messiah. Now, raise your hand if you've ever heard that word. Maybe you've grown up at church. Maybe you've heard this before. If you haven't grown up at church, you probably have not. Raise your hand if you've heard Messiah before. How many of you, with your hands raised, keep your hand up, if you can come up on the stage and define it for us. Oh my gosh, I've never seen the hands drop quicker than that. That was hilarious. Now, I won't make you come up and do that. So you've heard the word Messiah, but you don't maybe know what it is. That was funny. All right. This is why I love J.I. All right. So, the Messiah, what does it mean? Well, we find the word in ancient Hebrew, which is what the Old Testament part of the Bible, the first half of the Bible, roughly, was written, not in English, it was written in ancient Hebrew. And the word that we find in ancient Hebrew, the original term for Messiah, is Mashiach. Mashiach. Look to your neighbor and say that. It's really fun to say. Mashiach. That's it. Mashiach. Yes, it's a Hebrew term. Get the out there for the Hebrew terms. There you go. All right. Mashiach. It's Hebrew. And what does it mean? It simply means the anointed one. Anointed one. Now, to understand what anointed one is, we got to go and find the context of that term. So let's look at where this term comes from, the anointed one. Well, we find in the Bible that kings of Israel, of ancient Israel, thousands of years ago, were designated king by having oil poured over their head in an elaborate ceremony. And that's called being anointed. You're anointed with oil. You have oil poured over your head. That means that's what Messiah was. So technically, Saul, that was the first king of Israel, Saul, King Saul, when he was anointed, he was a Messiah, because he was the anointed one. He was the king. And then his successor, King David, he was the most famous of the kings of Israel. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of King David in the Bible. Ever heard of King David? There's a famous story of him fighting the giant Goliath, David and Goliath. Maybe if you haven't gone to church, you probably heard of that, even if you don't go to church. Right. David and Goliath. Same David. So, King Saul was the first king of Israel. He was the first anointed one of Israel. And David also was a Messiah, anointed one. And during the reign of King David, that was approximately around 1000 BCE, or 1000 years before Jesus Christ was born. That is known by most Jews as the Golden Age of Israel. The Golden Age of Israel was when King David reigned. Now his son Solomon actually expanded his kingdom and they were even more wealthy under his son. But the reason that it's known as the Golden Age under David as the second king was because David was such a great king. The Bible actually describes David as a man after God's own heart. What an awesome thing to say about somebody. To say that you're a man after God's own heart. Your heart has the same wants and desires as God's. That's how David was described. He's the only human who ever was said of in the Bible. That he was a man after God's own heart. He was a great king. He wasn't perfect. He definitely sinned and messed up. But overall, he was a great king who wanted to follow God's will for his life and for his people, Israel. However, starting with his own son Solomon, they did not follow in the ways of David. Their whole heart wasn't devoted to God. His son Solomon's heart was split between God and his wives. His son Solomon, it said, had 1,000 wives. And that they pulled him away from God. His son Solomon was pulled away from God by his pagan wives. And then after that, David's ancestors got worse and worse and worse. With a few exceptions over the next few centuries of David's kingdom, it was eventually split during the reign of David's grandson. The kingdom was split in two. The kingdom of Israel was in the north, and their capital was Samaria. And then in the south, which was David's kingdom, that became known as the kingdom of Judah. And their capital was David's city, Jerusalem. So after centuries of the split kingdoms, bad kings, with a few exceptions of a couple good kings over the next centuries, mostly bad, evil kings, in 597, the kingdom of Judah, which was David's ancestors' kingdom, because they had turned their back on God, God turned his back on them and handed them over to pagans. And in 597 BC, Jerusalem fell to the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian Empire and their king, Nebuchadnezzar. Any fans of The Matrix out there? Any Matrix fans? Yeah? What was the name of the ship in The Matrix, the main ship? Nebuchadnezzar. That's where they got the name. They got it from the Bible? Yes. They got a lot of stuff from the Bible. Trinity. A lot of different things. So Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, invaded Judah and sacked Jerusalem, David's city, the city of David. The next 6 centuries, 600 years, Israel was controlled by foreign kingdoms. Actually, a lot of the Israelites were exported. Nebuchadnezzar took a lot of the brightest and wisest people in Israel, the smartest and wisest Jews, and took them captive back to Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq. So during these 600 years, Israel is controlled by foreign powers. During this time in history, God was not heard from for 400 years. Prophets, godly men. There was no Bible books written back then. There was no prophecies going on. For 400 years, God stayed silent. Why? Because God's people, the Israelites, had turned their back on God, and so God stopped talking to them. Wow, 400 years. I don't know how many of you guys know American history, but the United States of America was founded in 1776. That's less than 300 years ago. America is not even 300 years old as a country. And for 400 years, God was silent to his people. Wow. From the book of Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament, to the first book of the New Testament. Anybody know what the first book of the New Testament is? Matthew. There's a 400-year gap. Nothing of any importance happened there, because God was silent. During this time, Messiah, the term, began to be used by Jews to refer to the Messiah. Remember, the Messiah could be any king, any anointed one. So David was a Messiah, Saul was a Messiah, Solomon was a Messiah. It was during this time, though, where they were under foreign rule. The people of Israel were under foreign rule, and God had been silent for 4 centuries. During this time, Messiah began being used exclusively to refer to God's Messiah. The Messiah, the ideal king, descended from King David, prophesied by Isaiah. who would establish a new, perfect kingdom of Israel. Moving on in Isaiah, going back to it. We're now in chapter 11, verses 1 through 10. Follow on the screen. For out of this, remember this is talking about the Messiah, Jesus. This is who this is talking about. 700 years before he was born. For out of the stump of David's family will grow a shoot. Yes, a new branch bearing fruit from the old root. Notice the B is capitalized. Does anybody know why the B is capitalized in branch? It's talking about Jesus, God. And the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding. The Spirit of counsel and might. The Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. He, Jesus, will delight in obeying the Lord. He will not judge by appearance, nor make a decision based on hearsay. He will give justice to the poor and make fair decisions for the exploited. The earth will shake at the force of his word, and one breath from his mouth will destroy the wicked. Whoa, that's crazy. How can that be possible? How can a man do that? Because he's not just a man. It's talking about Jesus, who is God. He will wear righteousness like a belt and truth like an undergarment. Hey Joel, can I get the next slide? In that day, now remember this is talking about Messiah, during Messiah's reign, during Jesus' reign. In that day, the wolf and the lamb will live together. Ooh, that's kind of crazy. The wolf and the lamb will live together. The leopard will lie down with the baby goat. So you got all these animals with their prey, and they're not eating each other. The calf and the yearling will be safe with the lion, and a little child will lead them all. The cow will graze near the bear. The cub and the calf will lie down together. The lion will eat hay like a cow. So in this day, the reign of Messiah, animals that are carnivores aren't going to eat other animals anymore. They're going to eat grass and hay. They're going to be herbivores. The baby will play safely near the hole of a cobra. Yeah, a little child will put its hand in a nest of deadly snakes without harm. Nothing will hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for as the waters fill the sea, so the earth will be filled with people who know the Lord. In that day, the heir to David's throne will be a banner of salvation to all the world. Big word there. Salvation. The nations will rally to him, and the land where he lives will be a glorious place. Now, as Jesus followers, we know, look at this text. This is talking about Jesus and his eternal kingdom in heaven. This has not happened yet. This will happen in the future when Jesus is reigning on earth. Right now, Jesus is not reigning on earth. We learned this in our series in October, that our earth right now, God is allowing Satan to run our earth. He's the prince of this world. So Jesus is not reigning in our earth, on our world right now. He's in heaven right now. He's reigning in heaven in glory. He's allowing Satan to rule on earth for a time, for now. But there will come a time when Jesus will return to earth and establish his perfect kingdom. And we know that's what we call heaven, eternity, and it'll never end. That's what this is talking about. But when the people of Israel, as we've learned about, read this, all they could think was an earthly kingdom, a political kingdom. So when they read this, like I said, as Jesus followers, we know what this is talking about. This is talking about heaven. But when Jews, 2,000 years ago, read this, they had a different idea in their mind. And it was this. Write it down. Number 2, Jai. The hope for liberation. Raise your hand if you've heard that word before. Liberation. Liberty. Freedom. Freedom. Why are they hoping for this? Why are they looking at the Messiah setting up an earthly Jewish kingdom? Why are they doing that? When we look back and we say, well, Jesus is talking about heaven here. Why are they looking at an earthly kingdom? Well, let's give us the background and the context and you'll know. You see, after briefly regaining their independence, the Jews were conquered finally in 63 BCE by the Romans. This time it was the Roman Republic, not yet the empire. The Romans brought advances in technology and resources to the Jewish people. Historians would tell you that. Everywhere the Romans went and conquered, they brought their advances in technology and resources. Things like their building programs. You know, if you ever saw a show about ancient Rome, what they built 2,000 years ago was amazing. The Colosseum sat like 65,000 people. They were doing modern day stadiums with convertible roofs, everything 2,000 years ago. They're pretty amazing people. I'm a student of Roman history. I love studying Romans. I think they're fascinating. mostly pagans, not Jesus followers most of the time, at least before Constantine's time, the first Christian Roman emperor. They're definitely pagans, but they're definitely fasting. Did you know that the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, that they had flushing toilets? 2,000 years ago. In America, a little over 100 years ago, a lot of people in America, just over a little over 100 years ago, didn't have flushing toilets. They had outhouses. The Romans had flushing toilets. Okay, so they're pretty amazing. Their legions brought stability to a region. They policed an area. Crime went down wherever the Roman legions went. They brought safety. Yes, they were conquering people, but after they were conquered, they were taken in by the Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire, and they defended their land against invaders and thieves. Like I said, I love Roman history. As some of you guys know, I'm going to actually be in Gold Creek's Christmas program. It's called Journey to Bethlehem, the Christmas Experience. Our gym in a couple weeks is going to be transformed into ancient Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, including like city walls. There's going to be like over 20 shops where you can buy food and different things like that. And it's going to be very, very realistic to what Bethlehem would have looked like 2,000 years ago. I'm actually in charge of the Romans. I'm a Roman centurion. So you can come see me and you can tell your family that's my pastor right there. If you say hi, pastor, I'm in character, so I'm going to be like, hey you! Don't even think you're stealing that. But you can come say hi to me, but I'll be in character. But I love Roman history, so make sure you guys come to that. That starts December 20th to the 24th. So I love Roman history. They were fascinating. So these are the good things that the Romans brought. Their technology, their buildings, their resources. They brought these to the Jewish people when they invaded and conquered modern-day Israel. But the drawback of when you got conquered by the Romans, those are the good things. The bad things were, well, that the Romans were brutal conquerors. Any historian will tell you that. They were definitely brutal. That fits the Romans. They seized private property. They levied staggering taxes that kept the majority of Jews in poverty, and mercilessly crushed any hint of rebellion through crucifixion and other modes of torture. If you guys are here in our October series, we went into depth about crucifixion and what Jesus experienced on the cross. We went into a lot of details, so we're not going to go back into that today. Needless to say, historians and scientists agree that crucifixion on a Roman cross, like we have there, was one of the worst ways to die ever concocted by humans throughout history. The Romans didn't invent crucifixion, but they perfected it. And in a rebellious outpost like Judea, which is where Jerusalem was, there was a lot of crucifixions. Most historians agree that throughout the entire Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire, there was a lot of rebellious areas. Most people that were conquered by the Romans, like in modern-day France or Gaul and Spain, Hispania, and those provinces, most of the people, basically for all intents and purposes, once they were conquered by the Romans, they might fight them, but once they lost the war, they would basically become Roman. They become part of, okay, these Romans are bringing a lot of good stuff to us. We can see they're very advanced. We really didn't have a chance against their legions. Okay, so we're going to become Roman now. Okay, that happened throughout most of the empire. But there was a couple places of resistance that always was resistant. One famous example was in Britain or Britannia, where the Romans tried to conquer the Celts in northern England and modern-day Scotland, and they never submitted to Roman rule. The legions could never defeat the Celts. And so what they did is they built, you might learn this later in a history class, maybe in high school or college, they built Hadrian's Wall to mark the northern edge, the farther northern point of the Roman Empire. That's as far as Rome went, all the way up into northern England. Because they couldn't conquer them. Another area of rebellion and resistance was Judea province. Judea, which is where we find modern-day Jerusalem, where the Jewish people lived. The Jews, throughout their history under the Romans, never did fully submit to Rome. They were always rebelling. Always rebelling. To be assigned, a Roman to be assigned to Judea was seen as a real negative. Okay, you're going to be the governor of, or the council of Judea. Oh, really? Those people? They're awful. They just rebel. That's all they do. They never submit to our rule. They're always assassinating our Roman officers in the market. They're horrible. Oh, man, I got to go there. It was seen as a real kind of demoting thing to get sent to Judea province. Because the Romans could not get the Jews to submit to their rule. And so, because the Romans were so brutal in crushing rebellion, there was a lot of Jewish ringleaders the troublemakers who were crucified. Thousands and thousands and thousands, and I'm talking men and women. Jews that were crucified just outside the city walls of Jerusalem, so that everybody could say, hey, I'm going to hang you on a cross till your body rots and decomposes, and to show everybody, right on the main road, this is what happens when you mess with Rome. This is what we're going to do to you. But it never worked. The Jews never submitted because they were so angry. What made them so angry? Why would they never submit to Rome when the rest of the empire pretty much was? Well, one reason was that the pagan Romans' mere presence in the holy city of David, Jerusalem, and home of God's temple were an unforgivable offense to many Jews. I was reading the history of this last week and kind of studying about when the Romans first invaded Jerusalem. And what happened is when the Roman legion actually went into Jerusalem, when they defeated them in 63 BCE, the Roman commander, Pompey, went in and walked right into the temple, and then he went into what's known as the Holy of Holies. That's the most holy place in all of the Jewish faith. And he went inside it. The high priest of Israel was only allowed to go into the Holy of Holies once a year, and that was it. And here you have this pagan Roman walking in, desecrating the temple in the Holy of Holies. He didn't even take anything. He walked in, desecrated it, and then walked out. And he goes, oh, sorry, that really upset you guys. Okay, here, you guys can purify it and do your thing again. Even though we conquered you, you can keep doing your priestly thing. But a lot of Jews never forgot that. They hated the Romans. So, fast forward to the 1st century. So that was 63 BCE. Now we're into the 1st century. Now the Roman Empire is started under the first Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus. It changed from the Roman Republic. It's now the Roman Empire. By the 1st century, most Jews expected Messiah, because of all this, to be a military leader who would bring political justice to the long-suffering Jewish people. How would he do this? By slaughtering, overthrowing, and expelling the despised Romans from their land, restoring David's royal line that was cut off hundreds of years before, and establishing a new political Jewish kingdom. Now in Isaiah we read about terms. It was justice. It was in both passages that we read earlier. Justice. Isaiah was prophesying the Messiah would bring justice. It didn't say political justice though. So the Jewish people took what Isaiah said about justice and peace and said, well, we don't have any justice or peace under the Roman Empire, so we're looking for a political, earthly kingdom. We want a new king, a new David. That's what Messiah was supposed to be to most Jewish people. You now understand the expectation the Jewish people had for the Messiah before he was even born. This was the world Jesus Christ was born into 2,000 years ago. So you guys, I want to make sure that you guys are here attending the next 2 J-High services over the next 2 weeks. The last 2 J-High services of 2013. So that you can find out exactly why Jesus' life caused such a scandal. You needed to hear this message today to set up the rest of the series. This was the expectation of the Jewish people for their Messiah. A political leader, a military leader who would slaughter and murder the hated and despised Romans. That was Messiah that Jewish people were looking for 2,000 years ago. Bow your heads, close your eyes. Some of you are new here. Some are first-time visitors, which we love having first-time visitors. You're our very important people today. You're our VIPs today here in J-High. Maybe you've been going here for a while. Here at J-High, we always say that having a personal relationship with Jesus is more important than anything. But there's some of you in a room this size that don't have a personal relationship with Jesus. See, some of you might think just being here at church means that you're a Christian. That means you're going to go to heaven. Some of you think that just because your parents call themselves Christians, that means that you're a Christian. Some of you think that being a good person means that you're a Christian, that you're going to heaven. While others of you think think that because maybe you were sprinkled with water in a church service, you were baptized as a little baby or a little kid, that means you're going to go to heaven. Well, I'm here to tell you today that all those reasons are false. If those are the means by your salvation, that you think that you're going to be saved and go to heaven by any of those things I just listed, I'm sorry, but it's not true. Because the Bible is very clear that Jesus is the only way to heaven. The Bible tells us that we are all sinners. And sin simply means messing up. And we know this. Nobody's perfect in here. We all mess up. We're all sinners. We know that. But here's the problem. My sin and your sin is very serious business to God. So serious, in fact, that in the Bible, God says that the penalty for sin is death. In the Bible, that means eternal separation from God in a place called hell. We believe in hell because Jesus believed in hell. He talked about it a lot. And the majority of people in our world are sadly going to spend an eternity in suffering in hell because they don't have Jesus. But here's the good news that we were kind of talking about today. The good news is that God didn't just leave us in our sin and the consequences of our sin. Because 2,000 years ago, God sent His only Son, Jesus, to be born as a human baby in our world, in our sinful, fallen, screwed up world. And He literally became God with skin on. That was the first Christmas that we're going to be talking about next week. And even though we're sinful, we're fallen, all humans are fallen, Jesus lived a perfect life. He never sinned. And because Jesus never sinned and messed up, He was the only one that could be that perfect final sacrifice for our sin. And that's exactly what He did. He chose to die a brutal death on a Roman cross like we talked about. And He bled, was beaten, He suffered, and He died. A horrible death in your place. He took the penalty that you deserve and that I deserve. We deserve to be hung on a cross and die for our sins. Jesus was innocent, but He took our penalty when He died on the cross. And He took our sin upon Himself. He did that because He loves you. He cares about you. He doesn't want you to spend an eternity in hell. He wants you to spend eternity with Him in heaven. And the good news is that He didn't stay dead. The story doesn't end there. 3 days later, God rose Him from the dead on the first Easter. And today He's reigning in glory at the right hand of God the Father. And what does that mean to us in 2013 in Seattle? What does that mean to us? It means everything. It means that if we say yes to Him and accept the penalty that Jesus paid for us on the cross 2,000 years ago, the Bible tells us we can be saved from the penalty of our sin. And when we die, instead of going to hell, which is what we all deserve, we can go to spend eternity with Jesus in heaven, in perfect joy and happiness. But Jesus died on the cross, that doesn't save everybody. There's a lot of people in America that believe that. Well, Jesus died on the cross, so everybody gets to go to heaven. No. Nope. Jesus was very clear that's not true. You need to say yes to Jesus. You need to make a conscious decision and remember a time where you say, yes to Jesus, I accept the penalty you paid for me. I accept you as my Savior. And if you honestly can't remember a time where you did that, not because a parent made you do it, not because a pastor made you do it, but if you can't remember a time where you did it for yourself, you need to do it today and say yes to Jesus. Don't wait. None of us know when our life's going to end. I always say, I could die on my way back to Bothell this afternoon. I don't know. But the thing is that I know where I'll spend eternity if I die today. I have 100% confidence